Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. So on today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to make a shirt dress, and it's very easy to make. So we are going to be drafting the front pattern first. So on this pattern, I've marked out the center front line. Okay, so from that center front line, I marked out extra 3 inches that is going to serve as the placket of this shirt dress. Okay, so by the time you fold it into 2, you would have 1.5 inches left. Okay, so I am just going to show you the measurement I used. So from my shoulder to the bust is 8 inches. The waistline is 16 inches and 24 inches for the hip line. And I'm going to be using the full pattern paper for the full length of this dress. So you are going to note that all our measurements are starting from the center front line. That line you are seeing there in the front, center front, that's where the measurement will start. So my shoulder measurement is 8 inches, which I have marked here on the shoulder line as well as the bust line. So on the shoulder line, I'm going to mark a neck width of 3 inches and a neck depth of 3 inches as well. Like I said, we are cutting the front pattern first. So in case you don't have a curved ruler, I'm just going to show you a trick that you would use to mark your your neckline correctly. So just the way I did, you're going to form a square with your measurements. After doing this, you're going to use your hand to connect from this point to the other point. It's actually very easy when you do it like this if you don't have your curved ruler. So as you can see how curved it is. So after that, I'm going to mark my shoulder slope of 1 inch, and I'm going to connect that to the neck width measurement I just made. So on the bust line, I'm going to mark a quarter of my bust measurement, which is 8.5. And I don't want this shirt dress to be too loose, so I'm just going to add 1 inch ease allowance. Okay, you can do 1.5, you can do 2 inches, depending on how you want yours to be, but I don't want mine to be very free, so I'm using 1 inch ease allowance. So on the waistline, I'm going to mark a quarter of my waist measurement, which is 6.75, and I'm also going to add 1 inch for ease allowance. So on the hip line, I'm going to go ahead and mark a quarter of my hip measurement, and I would mark 1 inch for ease allowance. Note that it's ease allowance we are adding, not seam allowance. Ease allowance, because this is not supposed to be tight. So I'm going to connect the bust line measurement to the waist, and then I'm also going to connect from the waist to the hip line like this. So I'm going to take my curved ruler and I'm going to curve out the waistline. Remember, that place is not supposed to be sharp, so just curve it out like that. So for my shirt, I don't want it to have a dart, but I'm just going to show you how you insert your dart, just in case you want that on your own. So on the waistline, I'm going to mark my bust span divided by 2, which is 3.5 inches. I'm also going to mark that on the hip line, 3.5 inches. And I will mark it on the bust line as well. So I'm going to take my straight ruler and connect the points I just made from the bust line to the waistline and down to the hip line. So after doing that, I'm going to go on the waistline. I'm going to mark 1/2 inch on this side and half an inch on the other side of the line. On the hip line, I'm going to go up by 3 inches. And on the bust line, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. And then I'm just going to connect my darts like this. After connecting the dart, you are going to take the measurement you have for the dart, which is 1 inch. Remember, we did half an inch on each side, and then you are going to mark it on the waistline. So we have 1 inch. So I'm just going to connect that with my pencil just so you don't get confused. Like I said, I don't need that for mine. So I'm just connecting that with a pencil like this. So if you are using that for yours, this is what you should have. Okay, this is what you should have. So by the time I take in the dart, if you take in the dart, the measurements you added will not be there any longer. Okay, so just take note of that if you want yours to have a dart. So moving on, I'm going to show you how to cover the armhole. So because it's a shirt dress and you want the front armhole to balance, we are going to find the middle on the armhole. The middle I have there is, I have 7 inches divided by 2, I have 3.5. So I'm going to mark that. And on that 3.5 inches point, I'm going to go in by half an inch. Then I'm going to just curve this out. So what we are trying to do is to make the front armhole dip a little bit. So we made it deeper with about half an inch. So this is what you should have. So on the lower part, I'm going to mark the entire measurement I have on the hip line. Mine happens to be 9.5. So I'm going to mark that on the full length of this dress. So I'm marking that on the pattern, on the lower part of the pattern, the measurement I have on the hip line. So I'm going to connect that measurement down to the hip line. All right. So after doing that, I want the lower part of my dress to be smaller than the hip area. So I'm going in by half an inch. And I'm going to connect that measurement down to the hip line. So the trick is you want the lower part of your dress to be a little bit smaller so that it will have better fitting on you. But if you don't want that, you can ignore it. But mine, I want it to be a little bit smaller on the lower part. So I'm going to cut on the second line I made. So don't forget to curve out the hip line as well. So that is what I just did. So on the lower part again, I'm going to go up by 3 inches. Okay, you can do 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inch, even 5 inches if you want, but I want mine to be 3 inches. That is because I don't want the lower part to be straight. I want it to be curvy. So from that 3 inches point I marked, I'm just going to curve it down to the edge of the pattern paper like this. You would understand better when I cut it out. So this is what I have. So I'm going to cut through that part I made because I don't want it to be straight or equal on the lower part. So that is it on how to cut it. I'm drafting, so I'm going to cut it out. But before I cut it out, you see that extra 3 inches we added. We are going to connect our neck measurement to that point. Okay, so we are going to cut through that part I just made. Okay, so we are not going to cut out our center front, the placket extension that we added. We are not going to cut it out. We are just going to cut through that mark I just made now. So like I explained, I don't want that for my own, so I'm going to cut out that dart extension I added. I just did that so that you would understand how to add your own dart. So I'm going to cut out that part. And so this part, like I explained, you are not cutting it out. The center front 3 inches extra you added, you won't cut it out. So I'm just going to cut out now. Just see the way I'm cutting it. So if you want yours to have a dart, you are not going to cut out the excess you added for the dart. I hope that is clear enough. So after cutting, this is what I have. So I'm going to go ahead and label this. We are going to cut 2 of this, okay? So I'm just going to write that, cut 2, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to cut the back panel. So this is the back. All right, I've marked out the measurements, the shoulder line, the waist, the bust line, the waistline, and the hip line. So like we did for the front, the full panel is going to be the full length of this dress. So all our measurement is going to start from the beginning of the paper like that. Okay, so I'm going to mark the shoulder measurement. I mean the neck width measurement. Remember, we used 3 inches for the front, so we are using 3 inches for the back as well. So for the neck depth is a standard. I'm using 1/2 inch neck depth, and that is a standard. You should use that as well. So I'm just going to curve that with my curved ruler. So after that, I'm going to mark a shoulder slope of 1 inch like we did for the front panel. So I'm just going to mark a shoulder slope of 1 inch, and I'm going to connect that to the neck depth, the neck width I just marked. So on the bust line, I'm going to mark 1/4 of my bust measurement. My bust is 34 inches, divided by 4 is 8.5, so I would mark that on the bust line. So I'm going to add 1.5 inches for the ease allowance for the back panel. So like I said, you can decide whichever one you want to use. So on the waistline, I'm marking 1/4 of my waist measurement plus 1.5 inches for ease allowance. And I'm also going to mark 1/4 of my waist measurement on the waistline. Then I would add 1.5 inches for ease allowance. So I'm going to connect the points from the bust line down to the waistline and down to the hip line. So I would cover the waist points so that I don't have any sharp edge. On the hip line, like we did for the front, I'm going to take the entire measurement I have there, and I'm going to mark it on the full length of this dress. So this is, I have 10 inches, so I would mark that. So I'm also going to go in by 1/2 inch. Like I explained this better in front. So I went in by 1/2 inch, and I'm going to connect that 1/2 inch point to the waistline like this. So I would curve out the hip, and on the lower part, I'm going to go up by 3 inches, and I'm going to use my curved ruler to find a curve. Just curve it to the edge of the pattern paper like this. After that, I'm just going to curve out the armhole like this. So if you want your pattern to have that, like I said, you can go ahead and add it the way we added for the front panel. You can add your dart. So for this one, we are going to be cutting on fold. So I'm just writing that down, cut on fold. So for this shirt dress, the back panel, we are not going to have any fold at the back. I don't want mine to have fold at the back, but if you want yours to have fold at the back, you can add from 1.5 inches to 2 inches at the back panel. So I'm just going to bring the front panel to explain better to you. So you see this extension we have in the front, from that line to that point, that's the center front, which is going to serve as the placket. So if you want yours to have a fold, you can add this extra 2 inches or 1.5 in front of it, just the way we added for the front panel. You can add it to the back to get the fold at the back, but I don't want mine to have a fold. That's why I did not add that fold, extra 2 inches to 3 inches for the fold. I hope that is clear enough. So I'm just cutting this out so you see. So after cutting it, this is what I have. I'm just labeling to show that this is the back and this is the front panel. So if this video has been helpful to you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much. Till I see you in my next video. Love you. Bye.